So Meghan Markle had her title permanently stripped by King Charles. And the wildest part isn't even the signature itself, it's that she apparently had no idea it was coming until the paperwork was already done. Like, we're not talking about a rumor or a tabloid leak here. We're talking about a formal order signed under the sovereign's authority, which means it's now part of the official royal record. And the timeline of how this all went down makes the whole thing feel less like a family dispute and more like a coordinated institutional move that everyone saw coming except the person it was actually about. Before we get into the details, make sure to subscribe to Crown Watch so you don't miss any updates on this story. What gets me about this situation is that Charles apparently sat in that room after signing, staring at the final paragraph like he was waiting for the words to rearrange themselves. He read the order twice, put both hands flat on the desk, and then told his aide, "It is done." That's not someone who's confident in their decision. That's someone who knows exactly how badly this is going to land and is trying to convince themselves it was the only option. And look, maybe it was. But the way the palace handled the secrecy around this thing suggests they knew it would be explosive and wanted to make sure nobody could talk them out of it before it was too late. The order itself does more than just remove a style of address. It severs one of Meghan's last visible links to the institution she left behind. The Duchess of Sussex title wasn't just a fancy name she used at parties. It was her identity in interviews, in commercial projects, in charitable campaigns, in public appearances. It was the thing that gave her global brand its royal credibility. And now it's gone, with additional provisions that limit how both she and Harry can present their royal connection going forward. That second part is almost more significant than the title removal itself, because it's not just looking backward at what happened, it's designed to control what comes next. So that's where it gets weird, because across the Atlantic, Meghan apparently believed the title was still hers right up until the message arrived. She had no clue that one signature had already changed the language of every future announcement, every reference, every public battle still to come. And when you actually look at what led up to this moment, it's clear the decision didn't come out of nowhere. It was triggered by something specific that happened weeks earlier. Here's what I mean. There was this private reception at Windsor Castle, the kind of gathering where phones are surrendered, aides stay outside, and everyone's reminded that nothing discussed leaves the room. It was supposed to be a reconciliation meeting, a closed-door attempt to settle family conflict without cameras or statements or outside pressure. And according to the accounts that have come out, Meghan changed the entire atmosphere with one sentence. During a discussion about future public work, she stated that Duchess of Sussex would remain her permanent global identity regardless of palace objections, royal duties, or new restrictions. Just flat out said it. A senior courtier responded that the title came from the crown and couldn't exist beyond the authority that granted it. And Meghan pushed back her chair, looked directly at Charles, and said the name now belonged to her public life and couldn't simply be withdrawn. Now, I want to pause here because this is the moment where everything shifts. If you're the monarch and someone sitting in your own palace tells you that a title you granted can't be taken back because it now belongs to them, that's not a disagreement about protocol anymore. That's a direct challenge to whether you even have control over royal honors. And Charles apparently heard this exchange again days later through a confidential security recording, which, by the way, is a whole other layer of this story that I find fascinating. The fact that these reconciliation meetings are being recorded for security purposes means the palace is documenting everything, which makes you wonder how many other private conversations are sitting on a server somewhere. Harry apparently stepped between Meghan and the courtier during that confrontation, accusing the palace of trying to erase his family while pretending to seek peace. His voice rose. Meghan refused to soften her words. The meeting, designed to repair trust, collapsed into exactly the conflict everyone was afraid of. And Charles, sitting alone with the recording days later, paused at Meghan's declaration and just sat there for several minutes. That's when the king stopped viewing this as confusion over protocol and started seeing it as something that needed a formal response. But here's the other piece that made delay impossible. A documented commercial briefing reached the palace showing plans for a major international project built prominently around the Sussex title. So now you've got a situation where Meghan has publicly declared the title was hers forever, and there's a business venture about to launch that uses that title as its foundation. If Charles waited until after the announcement to act, any intervention would look retaliatory and weak. The timing forced his hand. What happened next is honestly the most human part of this whole thing, Charles summoned Harry for one final face-to-face conversation before making the decision permanent. No aides, no cameras, just a father and son in the king's private sitting room with 2 untouched glasses of water and an unsigned order sitting in a dark folder. Charles asked Harry to sit down, but Harry stayed standing. He already knew what was in that folder. Charles tried to frame it carefully. He said the Sussex designation couldn't continue to imply royal authority while the couple rejected the duties and limits and public responsibility attached to that authority. And Harry's response was basically immediate. He accused his father of punishing Meghan because she refused to remain silent. He said the palace had turned every disagreement into a loyalty test and every criticism into an attack on the crown. To him, this wasn't about rules. It was about humiliation. Charles answered with what sounds like a quieter but very real anger. He said private family pain had repeatedly been carried into interviews and public statements and commercial projects, placing the monarchy under constant pressure. He reminded Harry that every royal title carries institutional weight, and that weight can't be used without responsibility. And then he gave Harry one final choice. Meghan could retain a private social connection to the Sussex name, but she would have to stop using it commercially in informal public branding. That was the compromise. Narrow, fragile, and clearly final. Harry rejected it. He argued that accepting those terms would allow the palace to control his wife's identity even after they'd stepped away from royal life. He reached for the folder, read the opening sentence, and set it down so sharply that one of the water glasses trembled against the table. That detail sticks with me because it's such a small thing, but it tells you exactly how tense that room was. He demanded to know if the decision had already been made. Charles closed the folder and told him that refusal left no responsible alternative. Harry walked toward the door, turned like maybe one last sentence could save them, and nothing came. The door closed, and the king remained beside the unsigned order, knowing the family confrontation had failed. That timeline doesn't add up if you think about it as just a father punishing a daughter-in-law. This was a negotiation that collapsed, not a decision made in isolation. Charles offered a middle ground. Harry said no, and then the order moved forward into the machinery of royal power. What's interesting is how many people were actually behind this decision. The order carried one signature, but the pressure came from everywhere. Senior advisors feared the Sussex title had become a rival brand. Constitutional officials worried that continued ambiguity would weaken the crown's control over its own honors. William saw an unresolved threat to the monarchy's future. There was a documented recommendation from constitutional advisors, communications officials, and senior household figures stating that indefinite uncertainty couldn't continue. Their argument was that each Sussex-branded interview or venture risked suggesting royal approval where none existed, and that the public might struggle to separate private commercial activity from the authority of the monarchy. William apparently paused outside the council room before the decisive meeting and crossed out a sentence in his prepared remarks that he worried sounded personally hostile toward Meghan. He wanted the distinction to remain clear. A royal title wasn't simply a family name. It was an honor granted by the sovereign, linking its holder to public service and the reputation of the crown. He said future generations couldn't inherit a crown in which royal designations operated independently of royal duty. That's not revenge language. That's someone thinking about precedent and what happens 10 or 20 years from now if this isn't addressed. Camilla was the one who seemed most uneasy about the whole thing. In a private conversation recorded in a household account, she warned Charles that permanent removal might make reconciliation impossible. She told him an institutional victory could become a permanent family defeat. And she also warned him that the public would see one signature, not the months of pressure behind it. She knew he would carry the blame alone, even though advisors and legal officials and senior relatives had shaped the decision. There's this detail that I think reveals a lot about how Charles was processing this. Apparently, the first draft of the order only proposed a temporary suspension, but advisors reviewed plans for continued international ventures built around the Sussex identity, and their conclusion was blunt. Temporary limits would invite repeated disputes and allow the conflict to return whenever a new project appeared. So the order became permanent, and Charles insisted on one thing before he would sign: the responsibility had to rest openly with him. No hiding behind committees or advisors. A second provision was added stating that future palace communications would no longer describe Meghan by the Duchess designation, making the change symbolic as well as formal. When the message finally reached California, Meghan opened it expecting another formal disagreement from London. The first line stopped her completely. The title she had used for years was no longer hers, no temporary restriction, no review period, no invitation to negotiate. She stood at the kitchen counter, reached the permanent removal clause, and read it again more slowly. Then she looked at Harry and asked the question that probably shattered him. He actually signed it? Harry waited only a few seconds before answering, but those seconds changed everything. Meghan recognized the truth in his silence. He had known permanent removal was possible after that final meeting with Charles, and he had protected Hope instead of giving her warning. He confessed that he couldn't force himself to say it aloud. He had wanted to believe his father would step back. Instead, his silence had left her unprepared. The practical damage was immediate. A major media project carrying prominent Sussex branding was scheduled to be announced within days. The timing of the order disrupted the launch before the world even knew it existed. Meghan's team uncovered this while reviewing the palace communication, and suddenly the personal betrayal had a financial dimension too. The Duchess designation appeared across planned announcements, charitable material, formal invitations, and commercial branding. Removing it threatened both her public standing and the structure of projects already prepared around the Sussex identity. But here's where the story takes a turn I wasn't expecting. After the advisors left and every public statement was postponed, Meghan and Harry sat alone and made a decision that changed the entire trajectory. They chose not to launch an immediate legal challenge or media counterattack. They chose to issue a restrained statement acknowledging the order without surrendering their dignity. And the way this happened is actually pretty significant. Harry opened a prepared draft that was filled with accusations against Charles and William and palace officials. He read the first lines, removed the sheet, and tore it in half. That gesture ended more than a paragraph. It signaled that every injury would no longer become another public battle. Meghan was the one who made that call. She admitted that another long public war could consume their family and turn every private wound into content for strangers. Harry answered with an even harder confession. He said fighting the palace had kept him emotionally tied to the institution he claimed to have escaped. Every attack, every defense, every interview pulled him back toward the same doors he had walked away from. That's a pretty remarkable moment of self-awareness, honestly. The fact that they both recognized the cycle they were trapped in and chose to step out of it, regardless of what you think about either of them, that's not nothing. Charles received private notice through a secure message before the statement was released. He read it alone and briefly closed his eyes. Their restraint hadn't restored trust, but it had prevented the crisis from becoming even more destructive. The final statement appeared under their personal names, stripped of royal language and open defiance. By sunrise in London, the private royal order had become a global argument. Broadcasters interrupted scheduled programming. Palace correspondents gathered beneath gray skies. A newspaper front page carried Meghan's portrait beneath 4 enormous words, "No longer a Duchess." And that's when the reality of what had happened really sank in. This wasn't a private family matter anymore. It was a worldwide judgment on monarchy and identity and power. A crowd gathered outside Buckingham Palace around a newsstand displaying Meghan's face with the removed title crossed out in red. Some people lifted their phones, others argued openly. A major broadcaster called it the most serious royal title dispute since Harry and Meghan left official duties. Supporters said Charles had finally defended the crown's boundaries. Critics saw something colder, a powerful institution humiliating a woman who had already walked away from royal service. William watched the coverage without sound, his face tightening as commentators described him as a driving force behind the decision. He had argued for clarity, but the signature belonged to his father, and he knew public anger rarely respects that difference. He also feared the story would deepen Harry's belief that his brother had helped close the palace doors forever. Camilla folded one newspaper shut before Charles could reach for it and told him not to read the personal attacks, but he had already seen the headlines calling him heartless and weak and vindictive. She reminded him that public fury would pass. He answered quietly that family judgment might not. Official digital records changed within hours. Meghan's title vanished from formal references and public pages and future naming guidance. The order was no longer an abstract document locked inside royal offices. It could be seen in every altered line. Charles stepped toward a palace window and heard distant voices from the crowd. He didn't wave. He understood that any gesture could look like victory, and this decision had brought none. So what does any of this actually mean now that the dust has settled? The order didn't produce a winner. Charles preserved the authority of the crown, but lost another piece of his relationship with his son. Meghan lost the title, but gained the final separation from the institution that had defined and wounded her. Harry could no longer pretend that reconciliation would restore the life he had abandoned. The monarchy defended its boundaries, but every person involved paid for that certainty. Charles returned to the room where he had signed the document, paused beside the same desk, rested one hand against the closed folder, and asked an aide to remove it from his sight. The order went to the Royal Archive, which is the secure collection where important crown records are preserved for history. Sending it there confirmed that the decision was permanent. It wouldn't remain nearby as a weapon or a warning or an invitation to reopen the dispute. The king didn't regret protecting the monarchy's authority, but he understood the human cost. Harry would never again look at his father without remembering that signature, and no constitutional argument could repair the distance it had created. Meghan faced a new reality without surrendering herself to it. She approved public materials carrying her personal name alone and told her team that future work must stand without borrowed royal significance. The title was gone, but her voice remained. For the first time, she could no longer measure her influence through a palace designation, and that loss slowly became a form of freedom. Harry reached his own painful conclusion. He accepted that protecting his wife and children required building a life untouched by palace approval, or inherited position, or dreams of returning. He had spent years fighting the institution while still waiting for it to welcome him back. Now that illusion was finished. William looked toward the future without celebration. He knew institutional clarity had been restored, but he also understood what happens when family conflict becomes constitutional action. The crown had strengthened its boundary while weakening the people standing behind it. Camilla spoke to Charles later and told him history might remember the order as strength, but the family would always remember it as loss. She waited for an answer. He gave none. There would be no reversal, no renewed negotiation, no restoration. Meghan moved forward without the title, but not without dignity. Harry lost the illusion of return, but gained a clearer future. Charles secured the crown while accepting that sovereignty couldn't heal a broken family. The order was locked away. Both households continued under separate identities, and the battle ended forever. The monarchy survived stronger in authority, but undeniably poorer in family.